Ben, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the welcome. It's great to be back here again. It almost feels like home, coming back to the New South Wales Farm Riders. One of the first outings that I think I had when I was doing my New South Wales gig was here at New South Wales Farm Riders. And since then, I've gone around and talked to the farm riders in South Australia, the farm riders in Queensland, and here again back to the farm riders in New South Wales. So it does feel a little bit like coming home, and what a day to come home on, eh? What's going to happen today? There's lots of things happening in Canberra. All the journalists are busy checking their phones and ringing and things, and most certainly I'll be gone by 2:15, just so that everybody knows. 2:15 I'm out of here. I'll be out of here before 2:15 probably. So, look, it's great to be here. Today I just wanted to share with you a little bit about me, for those of you who don't know me, a little bit about ag, and a little bit about, more importantly, NFF, what we're doing, how we can make the most of this wonderful story that is agriculture at the moment, and how we're helping to do that at NFF. So a little bit about me. Liverpool Plains, as Ben said, which is that very big looking area there on the map. That's not my farm. I think they've put a nice big hatchy bit there around Prima. But Prima is in the middle of nowhere or the middle of everywhere, depending on how you look at it. Certainly about 150 k's sort of southwest of Tamworth, north of Coolah, east of Coonabarabran, south of Gunnedah. Great farming land, black soil plains, and some hilly country as well, on which we grow our crops, and some of the pictures are there. And actually my son's just sent me through a crop of our newly emerged cotton, which was hailed last night. So I haven't got that photo to share with you today, but there's the ups and downs of farming everywhere, as it is on the Liverpool Plains. And so that's my day job, and the rest of the time I'm a passionate supporter and advocate of agriculture, and lucky enough to be able to go around and talk to people about what it is and what we can do. So as Ben said, ag is at the moment one of Australia's fastest growing sectors. I mean, what a fantastic time to be in agriculture. It was the biggest contributor to the growth in the last quarter's GDP, and a growth of 23% last year in the last 12 months. Now that's fantastic news. You know, those of us that are supporting ag and can see ag and can feel some of the buoyancy in the room, it's not necessarily a huge surprise, but it's great when you actually see those that buoyancy and that optimism translate into figures, and figures that are then recognised through the community. The challenge is to get that excitement out there, and to get some of those figures out there, and for people to actually see what ag is doing and how it's doing it. That $60 billion was farm gate value of our agricultural commodities last year. It was helped by some of the farm gate returns for livestock, pulses, those sorts of things. Grains are still really dragging a little bit in terms of some of the farm gate prices, but certainly those sorts of things have helped. And as we go forward, there's a lot of other things that we can do to actually to keep building that, so that we can actually be Australia's next $100 billion industry by 2030. When I was down in Tasmania last week at the Private Land Conservation Conference, and I actually shared with them that slide, and there was lots of oohs and ahs over the little lammy. But I think they were then worried about whether that would mean that, because the next question was about land clearing. And land clearing in Queensland, and did it mean that we farmers wanted to get our bulldozers out and knock down more trees so that we could put more lambs, so we could do all this stuff. And actually, in actual fact, that's not part of why and how we're going to become the next $100 billion industry. And I'll just skip forward there for a minute, and I'll come back about NFF for a minute. There are all these different sort of things that we need to make up a recipe for why we think ag is going to be a $100 billion industry. And we need to get some of those things right if we're actually going to achieve some of those goals. Anyway, so I'll go backwards again, just to skip around a little bit, to tell you a little bit more about the NFF. So the NFF, the National Farmers Federation, has been around for a long time. And in jobs like mine, you get a lot of history lessons, and some of the history lessons I can't do much about. However, it is important that we learn from history too, and I like to think about always planning about how we can go forward. So how can I take this information, how can we learn from it, and how can we go forward? And I think one of the biggest history lessons for me that's so relevant is the founding of NFF. So back in 1979, there was an era of strength about agricultural advocacy. It had some very, very strong organisations with some very, very strong leaders heading up those organisations. And they had a lot of power in politics in those days as well. You know, farming was still riding high, absolutely. And the organisations that represented farmers were very, very strong. But these 9 organisations got together and decided that even though they were very strong in their own states and they were very strong at a commodity level, they were going to get their best bang for their buck and the best outcomes for their members if they actually joined together as one national voice. And so was born NFF. And to me, that was an incredible amount of foresight for the agricultural organisation. And I'm not just talking about farmers here, I'm talking about agribusiness and everybody as well. For everybody to recognise that they're part of the one sector and work together is an incredibly difficult thing. And in 1979, to do that, I think showed incredible foresight. It bore a very strong organisation, and it's an organisation that now is, again, I'm pleased to say, one of the foremost advocacy organisations in Canberra. And I'll tell you a little bit about that as we go through with the policy. We have about 16 staff. There's actually 35 members. Over the last 12 months, we've brought 5 more members in, which has been fantastic, covering most states, territories and all commodities. And at NFF, we pride ourselves on policy that is objective, evidence-based, through a democratic process, and that gives us very strong policy. Some of you will recall, and I was just chatting with Matt about my first day in the job, nearly 12 months ago, and you will recall the backpacker tax, I'm sure. My very first day in the job, very first press conference, I had a little tangle with one of the senators, Ms Lambie. That was, what it did was actually, I felt I was on very safe ground because we had been prosecuting this issue. The backpacker issue had been going on for nearly 18 months. And at the very beginning of that 18 months, NFF had done a lot of work with regional Australia and tourism groups so that we developed policy that we knew stood up to the pub test. We knew that the rate that we were proposing and the range that we were proposing was actually competitive when you compared it to our competitors in Canada and New Zealand and the other places that people went to work as backpackers. And we knew we were on a strong footing in terms of what we were proposing. Pardon me, the debate had gone on for quite a long time, so that was, one of the issues. But certainly when we put that policy, I could firmly say to Jackie, that's why we felt we were on very strong ground and we needed to talk to her about that. She wasn't so good at listening just at that moment, but that's okay. We won the day in the end. So, but certainly the objective, it did put me on the national news, I have to say, as a lead story, and that doesn't normally happen to the president of NFF, so it was a good thing. But certainly I think we advocate policies with this objective, evidence-based democratic process. And at the moment, over the last 12 months, we've pushed the refresh button. It's been a good thing to have a look at what we do, how we do it, how we can do it better, and how we can keep being that very strong body for Australian agriculture going into the future as it's been in the past. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. That's our structure. So we've got a board, which is a governance board at the top, underlaid by members' council, and then our committees which do the policy grunt. So as part of the refresh, we've looked at our governance and we've wanted to make sure that we can have best practice across all our governance systems. And we've actually just brought in 2 independent directors into our board for the first time, I think, in NFF's history. So we actually have people outside of agriculture in our board. We have a digital specialist and we have a financial specialist who have an interest in agriculture, and they're certainly interested in contributing, but they're not actually farmers and they're not actually from one of our members. So that's something a little bit different, and we've really enjoyed the insights that they've brought, and we did that after looking at the skills of our current board. All of that's a little bit different for NFF, who has traditionally not had a huge focus on some of those governance processes. We've then had a look at our committees and the way we actually prosecute the policy. We had traditionally 13 committees, which was a huge amount of committees, a huge amount of work, a huge amount of minutes, a huge amount of meetings, all those things. And we've trimmed them down to 6 in an effort to make sure we can actually focus on the things that we need to focus on. Not spread ourselves too thin, but where we need to actually put our attention, we can. And so they are our committees with a couple of task forces, and it enables us to be more agile when we're dealing with issues, to be able to get evidence-based policy again, to make sure we've got the right people in the room dealing with those issues who have the knowledge, and to bring skills into those committees. Back to this recipe for a $100 billion industry. So how are we going to get there? $100 billion in 2030. If we keep growing at 23% every year, well, maybe we can get there just on those tenets alone. But we think that there's a number of things that we need to get right, and some of these are from industry's perspective, and some of these are actually from government's perspective. And some of these were actually highlighted in the blueprint that some of you will remember was launched back in, I think, 2013, I think. So some of these have been reflected from that blueprint. First one, human talent. So not only is it important to actually bring and keep the good people in our industry, but it's important too to bring in new talent. We don't just want to keep the best and brightest, we want the best and brightest in our industry. And if we have a look at the sorts of industries today in the Fin Review, I'm sure some of you saw the rich list, the new rich list for the young people in Australia, with a hugely different array of jobs than the traditional ones. So I think it's important that as we go forward into a technological time that is hugely disruptive, we don't know what the future is going to bring. We don't know how we're going to be producing food and fibre. We don't know what the consumers are going to be demanding. But we have to think of all these things. Then we're going to need great talent to actually make sure we can keep doing that in our industry. Flexible capital certainly is another one, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. There's no secret at all that some of the environment that we're operating in is with outdated infrastructure, outdated road and rail, inefficient infrastructure, outdated connectivity. We need to be able to bring in money to actually try and where that's going to come from is one of the issues, to try and make sure that we can do that, and also have a look at owning the land and flexible capital sources in terms of flexible ownership models. Accelerating productivity, how can we use that R&D to keep doing more? How can we keep growing better crops, more crops? Can we increase yield? Can we grow better? Or what is the answer? How can we be more productive? Premium branding. Branding is something that has eluded agricultural industry for some time. We all operate under our own brands, particularly at an export level. How much more could we achieve if we were to get under one premium Australian brand like New Zealand has done? That's something that we think is part of this recipe. Digital connectivity, another huge issue, and something that I think we've been very, very public about. Much of Australia is unfortunately in that 3% of population that is not covered by NBN fibre, whether it's to the node or the house or wherever it goes to, and we are dependent on the satellite. And at the moment, a lot of rural Australia doesn't have the ability to make the most of some of the amazing technological advancements that are coming our way. Market access is the last one. Andrew Robb, when he was in the job, did a great job of generating a whole lot of new markets. And some of those markets, it's slowed down a little bit now. We're still looking at some new ones in terms of Mexico, and of course Brexit, and the EU offers some opportunities going forward. But in terms of market access, just signing the free trade agreement doesn't necessarily mean happy days for everyone. And particularly if we're looking at agreements now like CHAFTA, the Chinese one, there's a lot of non-tariff barriers that actually come in to stop us actually putting in produce to that. And so happy to talk more about that later, because I think that's, people think, oh, happy days, we've got all these agreements, tick, 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 tick. But in actual fact, how does Fiona Simson then export her nectarines or her olives or whatever it is to these markets? Sometimes it's a lot of non-tariff barriers in the way. So what are those committees working on right now? And I've circled the 3 that I'm going to talk more about. So energy, huge public community discussion at the moment. Communications, as I said, we need to keep pushing for digital connectivity, good digital connectivity. As technology changes, we're going to get a lot more options around digital connectivity. At the moment, it's all around NBN and 4G, 3G, 4G. But what about 5G? What about when that happens? What about some microgrids providing connectivity to communities and farms? That sort of technology is only just around the corner. And how can we actually try and harness that? Because certainly the efficiencies that we can gain if we can get real-time information from our drones, from our sensors, from some of the amazing technology that we have there now, is going to really help us increase our productivity. And also, of course, be the backbone of regional and rural communities that are often quite remote. Investment, I'll talk more about that in a minute. And as with workforce productivity, and the last one, native title, there is a national native title review. Some big issues, particularly up in Queensland with some of the opportunities that are available for agriculture there at the moment, and also in some of those other northern areas. So we're just navigating our way through that at the moment, and it's a bit of we'll just keep an ongoing brief on that one. So first of all, energy. There's been lots of coverage about it. From my perspective, National Farmers made its first ever electricity policy and its first ever climate change policy in the last 12 months. So that has meant getting all 35 members, ranging from Soils for Life, Farmers for Climate Action, to the Northern Territory cattle growers, the AgForce, all the different organisations, cattle, sheep, wool, whoever it is, all around the table to agree on those policies. And for us, that meant it was a great opportunity that we could stand up in the discussion and the debate and say energy is a huge issue for agriculture. Whether you're a farmer like me, whether you're a processor and a producer like Sunrise or GrainCorp or any of those people, energy is a huge issue and a huge cost. And it's not just the reliability of the energy, but it's the affordability of the energy as well. And without a policy in government, an agreed, hopefully bipartisan policy in government, that actually gives us the sustainable, affordable power with a trajectory towards a lower carbon economy, as has been agreed by successive governments, then we're just not going to have that. We need investment and we need innovation. And without that policy, we didn't have it. So agriculture has been, I think, I've been really proud of how agriculture has been represented in that debate. We've appeared in all the major dailies. We were one of only 3 organisations asked to present at COAG when they were having the recent energy discussions, and different conferences, etc. So agriculture has had a good voice in this discussion. We've been able to we were on, as soon as they, last week, Tony and I were driving around Tasmania, we were on the phone to the Prime Minister and Josh Frydenberg telling us what was going to happen. So we're in the loop, and it's been an exciting thing for us to be in the loop and to be told. At the moment, we have the now called NEG, the National Energy Guarantee. As the little picture shows, it's just one piece of the broader puzzle. But we do think it has the capacity, particularly when we hear that it's likely to get bipartisan support federally, and hopefully potentially in the states as well. It has got, if we can get bipartisan support for this, does have the same sorts of outcomes as a clean energy target would have, and it would actually give us some security and certainty to enable some investment and innovation in the space. So take that in mind with the gold-plated network that we're paying for, the emergence of microgrids. I mean, it'd be an interesting thing. I'm not sure how many in the room would know if I asked you how many grids there were in Australia. Does anybody want to have a guess about how many grids there are in Australia? Power grids? Anyone have a guess? How many, Bren? Do you reckon you're a good one?
Well, I was going cattle grids, but...
Not sure.
500?
500. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good guess. 400. There's over 400. So our country is one of the... there's probably a lot more cattle grids. So you're going on cattle grids because that would be a fail if it was cattle grids.
I was going on the grids.
Oh, you are going on grids.
Yeah.
Okay, very, very smart. Okay, very good. I shouldn't have picked you. That's bad. Anyway, over 400 grids, microgrids, and of course the big grid in Australia. And we're for a country, we're actually up there in terms of how many grids we have. You know, not a lot of countries have as many grids as we have, and so microgrids now are emerging. But the way the NEM rules are written at the moment, they're not able to actually, you know, it's not attractive for them to be putting their power back into the grid. So there's a whole discussion there about, is it better for them to be leaving the grid? Is it better for them? And at the moment, it's pretty one-sided because it's just not attractive to be putting it back into the grid. Anyway, so that's an interesting discussion. Happy to talk more about it in questions. You give me that when I'm getting close to time, Ben, in terms of that. And the energy, so energy, huge issue, it's taken a lot of resources, but very, very proud and good that we've been leading the way in those discussions. Second one that's again commanding a lot of press and public attention, sometimes not for the right reason, is the meeting our workforce needs. Our industry does have a labour supply gap. Pretty much wherever it is, whatever we do, a lot of the jobs, we just have to face the facts that whatever the jobs we have, a lot of the jobs that we have, people don't want to do. Australians don't want to do. So last week I was in Tasmania touring a big berry grower, and I thought it was a lovely working environment. So, you know, wandering around, Tasmania is very pretty. You don't have to bend down. The berries are up on raised beds. It's all, you know, covered in nice tunnels, so you don't get direct sun. However, 250 people they employ for 7 months of the year picking, and very, very few Australians want to take on those roles. So they are absolutely dependent on overseas workers. And at the moment, I have to say, most of the visas in Australia that cater for them, particularly with the demise now of the 457, have been tweaked to fit agriculture. So instead of actually being a visa that is there for agriculture, it's a visa that has been filled with around the edges to try and make it fit agriculture. And the 457 was a great example of that. So the pork and dairy industries had to use the 457s in the end and used the 457s to bring in specialised labour, but they had to do it through a special agreement annexed to the 457. It wasn't part of the 457. And the backpacker visa, there's a lot of stuff in the press at the moment about, 88 days and backpackers having to go into these regional areas for 88 days and some farmers who are maybe not doing the right thing. And of course, that's never acceptable. But again, the backpacker visa, not specifically set up for rural work and not working well for us at the moment necessarily. So what we're proposing and talking to government about, and there's quite a lot of appetite for it, is an ag visa. What does an ag visa look like? And this would be a visa that would be specifically set up for ag. It would specifically recognise the shortage, the labour shortage in many of our industries and many of our regions. And we're interested in talking, and we are talking more to our members right now about what they think that visa would look like, and of course marry that in with what government would think it would look like. So some of the alternatives we'd have, for example, is would it be a seasonal worker program? Would it be a full-time worker program like the 457s? Talking to horticulture, who is one of the biggest users of this sort of labour, seasonal workers, perhaps an extended seasonal worker program specifically might suit something like that to get skilled workers coming back and back and back year after year after year for the peak times that they need to harvest. Anyway, we need to, first of all, look seriously at working on that, and we're certainly doing that. And we also need to then make sure that we're taking very seriously the concerns about worker exploitation. It's not acceptable to exploit workers, and farmers must have best practice on farms in terms of employment. And there's been some initiatives launched by GrowCom in Queensland, and also will be launched later on by ourselves, to actually look at this and address this and make it easier for farmers to have the right sort of arrangements in place with their workers. It's never acceptable though to exploit workers, and we need to make sure that we can take those seriously and move towards a situation where we're not. In the meantime, it's a very small percentage of farmers that's doing it, but it sours the whole industry. The third one I want to talk about is one that does attract a huge amount of media. On my recent LinkedIn blog that I put up, I think it's nearly 6,000 people now that have accessed it, because I actually said something that people don't always think farmers think, and that is that we need foreign investment to grow. And so when you think about that $100 billion and where we want to get to, you think about how that capital's, the sort of shortages of capital that we have in there now, a $160 billion capital gap. Where are we going to get that money from? How is it going to come in? The super funds in Australia are starting to tinker a little bit with agricultural investment. Hasn't traditionally suited their needs. there is a lot of capital overseas that is only too willing to come in, but how can we harness that? How can we talk to the community about it? How can we make sure that farmers themselves understand that it's a good thing to have growth in their industry? And in actual fact, let's support it and let's have more of it, because whether it's investing in supply chains, whether it's investing in infrastructure, whether it's investing in farmers' businesses and looking at different innovative farmer ownership models and all those things, capital is a good thing, growth is a good thing, and it's certainly a good thing if you're a farmer or if you're involved in agriculture in any way.